After trusting my daughter to care for me in my old age, I received a brutal text. Your house is already sold. Bye. They'd taken everything, leaving me exiled in a tiny apartment. I just texted back, okay, but you forgot something. When her panicked call came, demanding to know what I meant, she finally realized who truly held the power. Hear my story, then like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The harsh glare of the morning sun usually brought Eleanor a quiet sense of peace. At 66, her days in the small, unfamiliar apartment often blurred into a monotonous rhythm of reading and muted television. But today, that fragile peace shattered the moment her phone buzzed against the polished wood of her bedside table. It was a text from Audrey, her only daughter. A text that, even before she opened it, sent a shiver of dread down her spine. Audrey rarely texted, preferring short, clipped calls. Her fingers, slightly swollen with age, fumbled as she tapped the screen. The message that bloomed into stark clarity was a cruel, blunt instrument. Don't bother, we're moving out. Your house is already sold. Bye. Eleanor stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. The casual dismissal, the utter lack of warmth, hit her with the force of a physical blow, but it was the phrase, your house, that truly twisted the nerve in her gut. Her house, the home where she had lived for 30 years, where she had raised Audrey, where every creak of the floorboards held a memory, where the scent of baking lingered in the kitchen on holidays. It wasn't our house or the house, it was your house, a possessive phrase wielded like a weapon, stripping away her connection, invalidating every minute she had lived, loved, and grieved within its walls. It wasn't just a house, it was her history, her legacy, her very identity, now reduced to a transaction. Without thinking, she pressed Audrey's contact. The phone rang once, twice, then a flat, mechanical voice informed her, the number you have dialed has been blocked. Blocked. The word hung in the air, heavy with a bitter familiarity. It was the same hollow feeling that had consumed her 20 years ago when Robert, her husband, had packed a single suitcase and walked out, leaving nothing but a note and a trail of unanswered calls. Audrey, her own daughter, had blocked her. The betrayal tasted just as sharp, perhaps even sharper this time. Her mind, usually a calm, orderly place, raced, trying to piece together the fragments of this sudden, brutal truth. We're moving out. Who was we? Audrey, of course, and Liam, her husband, whom Eleanor had always considered a good, if somewhat quiet man, and the children, Emily and Noah, her beloved grandchildren, whom she adored and had helped raise through countless after-school pickups, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. Had they known? Were they part of this we? The thought of her grandchildren, innocent yet perhaps complicit, sent a fresh wave of grief through her. Her hands trembled as she clutched the phone. She had to respond, not with anger, not with desperation, but with something that acknowledged her existence, her awareness. With immense effort, she slowly typed, her fingers feeling strangely detached from her will. Okay, but you forgot something. Almost instantly, a reply popped up. Audrey's impatience, her irritation, practically radiated from the screen. What are you talking about? Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She closed her eyes, trying to quell the rising nausea. Recent memories flooded her mind. Audrey's increasingly dismissive tone, the way she would cut calls short, the I'm busy mom that replaced genuine conversation. Eleanor had tried desperately to bridge the growing chasm. She'd baked cookies, offered to babysit more, even suggested lunch dates that were always rescheduled. She had felt herself shrinking, becoming less important in her daughter's life, a silent observer to her own slow fade. 2 years ago, Audrey and Liam had come to her, full of smiles and what seemed like genuine concern. Mom, Audrey had begun, her voice gentle. This house is too much for you. All those stairs, the upkeep. Liam and I have been talking, and we think it would be so much better if you moved into a smaller, more manageable apartment. Something cozy. They had painted a picture of a carefree life, no more garden work, no more leaky pipes, just peace. It had been presented as a favor, a selfless act of love from her thoughtful daughter and son-in-law. We'll take care of everything, Audrey had promised, her hand resting reassuringly on Eleanor's arm. We'll handle the sale of your beautiful three-bedroom colonial. You just focus on relaxing. Eleanor's colonial, with its wide porch and ancient oak in the front yard, had been more than just a house. It was where she had nursed Audrey through chicken pox, where she had celebrated Christmases that sparkled with joy, and where she had sat on the porch swing, watching the world go by, feeling utterly at home. Eleanor, trusting her only child, believing implicitly that Audrey and Liam had her best interests at heart, had agreed. She had been tired, and the thought of less responsibility was appealing. She had moved into the cramped, sterile apartment, exchanging her cherished garden for a small balcony that offered a view of another brick wall. Now, the weight of that decision pressed down on her, confirming her exile. Another text from Audrey. Seriously, Mom, what did we forget? I need to know. The irritation in her daughter's message was palpable, but beneath it, Eleanor sensed a tremor of something else. Urgency, and perhaps a flicker of vulnerability. It was the crack in Audrey's carefully constructed facade, a hairline fracture in her certainty. A slow, bitter smile spread across Eleanor's lips, the first genuine expression she had worn in hours. They had forgotten something indeed, something vital, something that rendered their grand scheme utterly meaningless. The house, her beloved colonial, was never legally Audrey's to sell. A memory, sharp and clear, pierced through the fog of betrayal. 23 years ago, after Robert had left her, she'd been shattered, but not broken. A wise lawyer, a family friend, had advised her. Eleanor, he'd said, protect yourself. You never know what life will throw your way. She had listened. She had established a trust, placing her most valuable asset, the house, securely within its legal confines. A decision she had made out of self-preservation, never imagining it would protect her from her own daughter. The deed, meticulously preserved, clearly showing the house still legally in Eleanor Vance's name, not Audrey's, lay in her safety deposit box at the bank. Alongside it were the meticulously notarized trust documents, ironclad proof of her ownership. Audrey and Liam might have gone through the motions, signed papers, and collected funds, but without Eleanor's explicit, informed consent and signature on the correct trust documents, the sale was a house of cards, a colossal, illegal mistake. Her phone vibrated again, this time with an incoming call. It was Audrey. Eleanor looked at the screen, the caller ID flashing her daughter's name. This time, Audrey was calling, not texting. And Eleanor knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that the panic in Audrey's voice, which would undoubtedly soon follow, would not be feigned. The power had shifted, and Eleanor, the once discarded mother, now held all the cards. Eleanor let Audrey's name flash across her screen, once, twice, then fade into darkness. The phone buzzed again, an insistent, angry vibration against the polished wood. She ignored it, letting it ring out, then silence itself once more. For too long, she had allowed the noise of her daughter's demands to drown out the quieter, more painful echoes of her past. Now, with the raw wound of betrayal throbbing in her chest, Eleanor found herself finally ready to listen to those echoes, to strip away the comforting lies she had told herself, to confront the unsanitized truth of her life. Her mind drifted back, not to the recent past, but to a time when Audrey was 12, all gangly limbs and bright, curious eyes. That was the year Robert had left. He had stood in the living room, the very same living room in the colonial house they now fought over, a flimsy duffel bag at his feet. His gaze had been averted, sliding past Eleanor, past Audrey, who stood silently clutching a worn teddy bear. She's better off with you, Eleanor, he'd mumbled, an almost imperceptible shrug of his shoulders. Kids need their mothers. Then he was gone, off to start a new life with a woman half his age, leaving behind a bewildered daughter and a wife whose world had just imploded. Those words, spoken with such casual cruelty, had felt less like a blessing and more like a dismissive burden, a final selfish act wrapped in a thin veneer of concern. Eleanor remembered the ache in her chest, a hollow emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. But she couldn't break. Not then. Not for Audrey. She had looked at her daughter's tear-filled eyes and swallowed her own grief, her fear. Your father had to go away for a while, sweetie, she'd lied, softening the brutal edge of abandonment. But you know what? It's just you and me now, you and me against the world. It was a promise she had whispered with fierce conviction, a vow she had nearly broken herself trying to keep. The struggle that followed was immense, a relentless uphill battle against financial ruin and emotional exhaustion. Her nurse's salary, while respectable, was never meant to sustain a single parent and a substantial mortgage. Eleanor took on double shifts, triple shifts, her body aching, her mind always on the edge of exhaustion. There were no luxuries, no vacations, no new clothes unless they were absolutely necessary. Meals were simple, often repetitive. The house, her anchor, became a constant drain, demanding every spare penny, every ounce of her dwindling energy. Yet she clung to it, a symbol of stability for Audrey, a fortress against the cruel realities of their suddenly fractured world. Young Audrey, to her credit, had been remarkably understanding. She'd learned to make her own simple dinners, macaroni and cheese from a box, toast with jam. She walked to school, rain or shine, her small backpack often heavier than she was. Eleanor remembered coming home late one night, her feet throbbing, to find Audrey asleep on the couch, a half-eaten sandwich beside her, a note scrawled in childish handwriting. "Good night, Mom. Love you." Those moments were both a balm and a renewed burden, fueling Eleanor's determination while twisting her heart with guilt. Sacrifice became the rhythm of Eleanor's life. Audrey, bright and eager, had developed a fascination with science. For her 13th birthday, she desperately wanted a microscope, an expensive one that Eleanor knew was far beyond their budget. Eleanor had worked 3 consecutive overnight shifts, her vision blurring, her body screaming for rest. She'd even fallen and scraped her knee on the hospital floor, earning a minor black eye from hitting a doorframe in her exhaustion. But she hadn't cared. The extra $250, carefully hoarded, had bought that microscope. Seeing Audrey's face light up, holding the gleaming instrument, made every aching muscle, every hour of lost sleep, utterly worth it. Years later, when Audrey was 17, the prom loomed. All her friends were talking about dresses, limousines, and flowers. Eleanor, whose tax refund had just landed in her account, a small cushion she'd planned to use for new tires for her ancient car, didn't hesitate. She took Audrey to the fanciest boutique in town, watching with a lump in her throat as her daughter twirled in a shimmering pale blue gown. The entire refund, every last dollar, went to that dress. The smile Audrey gave her that night, looking like a princess, made Eleanor feel like the richest woman in the world. Then came college. Audrey, brilliant and ambitious, was accepted into her dream university, a prestigious institution with daunting fees. Eleanor didn't bat an eye. The house, that steadfast symbol of their life together, became the means to Audrey's future. Eleanor refinanced it, taking out a second mortgage, signing away a piece of her security without a moment's hesitation. The years that followed were a blur of intense deprivation for Eleanor. Ramen noodles became a staple. Her nurse's scrubs were patched and mended until they were threadbare. Her old car groaned and wheezed, threatening to break down at any moment, but repairs were postponed. The thermostat in the house stayed low, even in winter, saving precious dollars for tuition. 4 years of personal sacrifice, all so Audrey could emerge, not just with a degree, but with the confidence and opportunities Eleanor had never had. And emerge she did, magna cum laude, a radiant, self-assured young woman, ready to conquer the world. Standing in the commencement crowd, watching Audrey stride across the stage, cap and gown flowing, Eleanor had felt a surge of pride, so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Every single sacrifice, every moment of hardship, felt utterly vindicated. This was her legacy, her beautiful, successful daughter. Audrey quickly landed a coveted job in a top advertising firm. Her career soared. Then came Liam, a charming, intelligent man from a good family. Eleanor had welcomed him with open arms, seeing in him the stability and happiness she wanted for her daughter. Life, it seemed, had finally smoothed itself out. Eleanor had done her job and done it well. She was immensely proud, but slowly, imperceptibly at first, a subtle shift began. Audrey's calls became shorter, her visits less frequent. The conversation often veered to Eleanor's home. "Mom, that house is really quite large for just one person, isn't it?" Audrey would remark, casually during a hurried phone call. "All those rooms to clean." Eleanor, then around 58, still strong and capable, would brush it off. I manage just fine, dear. It's my home. But the comments persisted, insidious little suggestions that began to chip away at her peace of mind. The pressure intensified after Audrey married Liam. With a joint income and their ambitions growing, the narrative changed. You know, Mom, Audrey said one day, Liam and I were thinking, with Emily on the way, we really need to start consolidating resources. Emily, her first grandchild, had been born, a bundle of joy that Eleanor had hoped would bring them closer. Instead, it seemed to create a new distance, a new urgency in Audrey's tone. It just makes sense, economically. The phrase consolidating resources hung in the air, cold and calculated. The first clear sign that her daughter's love had perhaps always been conditional, and her house, Eleanor's beloved home, was simply another resource to be managed. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in her cramped apartment was the only sound Eleanor could hear, a stark contrast to the familiar symphony of her old house. The creaks of settling wood, the distant chirping of crickets through an open window, the comforting tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Now, sitting alone, the cruel text from Audrey echoing in her mind, Eleanor finally saw the manipulation clearly, a slow, insidious poison she had willingly consumed, all because she trusted her daughter implicitly. How could she have been so blind? Her love, her unwavering belief in Audrey, had rendered her vulnerable, a willing participant in her own marginalization. She remembered the day she agreed to move out. Audrey and Liam had arrived full of earnest concern. Mom, Audrey had said, her voice laced with a persuasive blend of love and practicality, the house needs a lot of work to sell at a good price. It's a bit dated. Liam had nodded in agreement, pointing out the avocado green kitchen and the slightly scuffed hardwood floors. We think it's best if you move into this apartment we found, just temporarily while we make the house market ready. Think of it as a little vacation. Eleanor had hesitated, clutching the arms of her favorite armchair. Leaving her home, even for a short time, felt like severing a limb. But Audrey's eyes, so like her own, had brimmed with what Eleanor believed was genuine care. It's just for a few months, Mom. We'll handle everything. And they had, in a way. Everything meant gutting the kitchen and replacing the cabinets with sleek, modern gray ones. It meant tearing up the worn carpet and refinishing the original oak floors, a detail Eleanor had always loved. It meant updating the master bathroom, a costly endeavor that involved tearing out the old tiling. $23,000, Liam had casually mentioned once, in passing, for these renovations. $23,000. Eleanor didn't pay a dime for, nor did she have any input on the design choices. Liam had called it an investment in Mom's future, a phrase that now tasted like ash in her mouth. Eleanor, meanwhile, had waited in her small apartment, a prisoner in her own life, excluded from every decision, every brushstroke of paint. She had tried at first to be involved. Could I see the plans for the kitchen, dear? She'd asked Audrey one afternoon. I always dreamed of a skylight over the island. Audrey had laughed, a light, dismissive sound. Oh, Mom, don't worry about it. We've got everything handled. It's going to be beautiful. Trust us. The words trust us had been a subtle snare, drawing her deeper into their web of control. She had trusted, blindly, completely. Her new place was a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a large complex. It was clean, functional, but utterly devoid of soul. The walls were thin, allowing the muffled sounds of her neighbors' lives to seep in. A crying baby next door, the rumble of a television through the floor, the incessant traffic noise from the busy street below. Her cherished garden was replaced by a tiny, unused balcony. The spacious rooms of her colonial, filled with memories and light, were a world away from these cramped, impersonal quarters. She felt not just exiled, but diminished. 2 years, 2 long years had stretched on, filled with excuses. The market isn't quite right yet, Mom, Audrey would say whenever Eleanor cautiously inquired. Interest rates are too high. Or, just a few more little improvements, Mom, to really maximize the value. We don't want to undersell it. The improvements never seemed to end, and the temporary stay stretched indefinitely. Eleanor had felt herself shrinking, her voice becoming smaller, her presence less significant. She was no longer a homeowner, a mother, but a guest, a project, a burden. The dismissive text about the house being sold was not a sudden act of cruelty, but the brutal culmination of years of slow, deliberate erosion. With a heavy sigh, Eleanor reached for the worn photo album tucked under a pile of magazines. Its pages held the story of her life, her love, her sacrifices. She flipped through them, tracing the faces of a younger, happier Audrey. Here she was, a chubby-cheeked baby, clutched close to Eleanor's chest. Here she was, a gap-toothed child, beaming beside the Christmas tree. Here was Audrey at her high school graduation, radiating hope, Eleanor's heart bursting with pride. But as the pages turned, moving closer to the present, a subtle shift became apparent. In photos of Audrey's college graduation, Eleanor noticed a faint stiffness in her daughter's smile, a slight distance in her gaze. In pictures from Audrey's wedding, Eleanor, standing slightly to the side, looked less like a proud mother and more like an afterthought. In recent family photos with Liam and the children, Audrey's eyes often seemed to bypass Eleanor, focusing instead on her husband, her children, her future. When had I become invisible to my own daughter? Eleanor whispered to the empty room, her voice hoarse with pain. When had I stopped mattering? Just then her phone buzzed, vibrating insistently against the table. Audrey, another frantic text. Mom, I'm getting worried. Call me back. We need to talk. Eleanor stared at the message, a grim satisfaction beginning to unfurl in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in years. She had worried for too long. Now it was Audrey's turn. Without a moment's hesitation, Eleanor pressed the power button, plunging her phone into blessed silence. She would let Audrey worry. She would let her wonder. For the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor was seizing control. She slept fitfully, but with a new sense of purpose. When she woke, the first thing she saw was the flashing red light on her now recharged phone. 17 missed calls, 12 frantic text messages. Audrey's desperation was palpable, escalating with each passing hour. The texts ranged from pleading to demanding, finally culminating in a thinly veiled threat. If you don't call me back, Mom, I'm coming over there. The very last message, glowing on the screen, sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Not of fear, but of vindication. Mom, I'm scared. What did we forget? A slow, deliberate smile touched Eleanor's lips. Scared, you say. Good. She had felt that terror for far too long. Now Audrey could feel a fraction of it. Eleanor swung her legs out of bed, the bitter taste of revenge mingling with a strange, empowering sense of clarity. It was time to make her own calls. The morning sun, usually a source of irritation in her small apartment, now felt like a spotlight, illuminating the path forward. Eleanor ignored the relentless buzzing of her phone, a muffled sound that no longer stirred fear, but a growing sense of determination. Today, she wouldn't just survive, she would fight back. With a purposeful stride, she grabbed her purse and headed out, leaving Audrey's frantic calls to echo in the empty apartment. Her destination was the First National Bank, a sturdy brick building that had stood on Main Street for decades. Inside, the cool, quiet air of the vault area was a welcome change from the oppressive heat of her emotions. Ms. Garcia, the bank manager, a woman with a kind smile and sharp eyes, greeted Eleanor warmly. Good morning, Mrs. Vance. What can we do for you today, son? Garcia, Eleanor thought, was utterly oblivious to the storm brewing beneath Eleanor's calm demeanor, a storm that was about to break with the force of a long-suppressed earthquake. After the usual pleasantries, Eleanor was led to the private viewing room. With a heavy key, Ms. Garcia unlocked the sturdy safety deposit box. Inside, neatly organized, lay the tangible proof of Eleanor's foresight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out the thick envelope labeled Trust Documents. Vance. There it was, the trust agreement, meticulously drafted back in 1999, shortly after Robert had left. It detailed the establishment of the trust and the placement of her home, the beloved colonial, within its protective legal framework. Then the original deed bearing her name, Eleanor Vance, as the sole owner, and finally her will, carefully updated over the years, ensuring her wishes were clear. But the most crucial document, the one that held the true key to her revenge, was an addendum, a separate legal instrument drafted 5 years after the initial trust. She remembered signing it, a quiet afternoon with her lawyer, a cautious man who had gently urged her to consider future contingencies. This addendum explicitly stipulated conditions under which the house could be sold or transferred. It required Audrey to maintain a respectful and loving relationship with Eleanor, to treat her with dignity and care, and most importantly, to include her in all major decisions concerning the property. As Eleanor reread the carefully worded clauses, a bitter smile touched her lips. Audrey, with her casual cruelty, her dismissive texts, her manipulative schemes, had spectacularly failed to meet every single one of those conditions. The document was clear. Without Eleanor's full, informed consent, and without adherence to these stipulations, any sale was invalid. Eleanor pulled out her phone and, with slow, deliberate movements, photographed every relevant page: the initial trust document, the original deed, and the pivotal addendum. Each click of the camera felt like a small act of defiance, capturing the irrefutable truth. Once satisfied, she carefully returned the documents to the box, the weight of them feeling less like a burden and more like a shield. Her next stop was the county courthouse. The records department was bustling, but Eleanor patiently waited her turn. She requested the public records for her old address. The clerk, a young woman with a polite but harried air, quickly pulled up the information. There it was, stark and undeniable: a pending sale. The buyers were a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, their names clearly listed. They had agreed to pay $450,000 for the house. $450,000. Eleanor remembered buying it for $98,000 30 years ago. The significant jump in value, while gratifying, was overshadowed by the looming injustice. A pang of genuine sympathy shot through her. The Millers, innocent in this tangled web of deceit, were about to purchase a dream home that, legally, wasn't actually for sale. As Eleanor walked out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun warm on her face, her phone vibrated again. "Audrey," this time Eleanor answered. She took a deep breath, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the strained panic she could already hear in Audrey's opening words. "Mom, finally! Where have you been? I've been calling you all morning. What is going on?" Audrey's voice was high-pitched, laced with barely suppressed hysteria. "I've been busy, dear," Eleanor replied, her tone even, almost conversational. "Doing some errands. What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" Audrey nearly shrieked. "You tell me. What did we forget?" "What are you talking about? The Millers want to close by the end of the week, and the lawyers are asking about some missing paperwork." And she trailed off, a desperate catch in her voice. Eleanor let a beat of silence hang in the air. "The sale, you mean?" she prompted, as if it were a casual inquiry about the weather. "Yes, the sale. We've handled everything, Mom. Everything is in order. We're going to set up something very nice for your retirement, something comfortable and secure." Audrey's voice was suddenly smoother, falling into her familiar persuasive tone, as if trying to reassert control. "Audrey," Eleanor said, cutting through her daughter's practiced assurances, her voice still calm but with an undeniable steel underneath. "Whose name is on the deed to the house?" A pause, a long, agonizing pause on Audrey's end. Eleanor could almost hear the gears turning, the sudden, terrible realization dawning. "Well, Mom, it's ours now. We've been taking care of everything. We've paid for all the renovations. It's implicitly—" Audrey faltered, her voice losing its certainty, betraying a profound, horrifying assumption. Eleanor knew then, with absolute certainty, Audrey had no idea about the trust, about the addendum. She had simply assumed, with the arrogant confidence of the entitled, that because she was the daughter, because she had paid for some renovations, the house was hers to sell. The sheer audacity of it left Eleanor breathless, but also strangely invigorated. "Audrey," Eleanor continued, her voice now a cold, clear stream, "I need you to come over immediately to my apartment." "Mom, I can't right now. Liam has a huge meeting, and I have to pick up Emily from school, and the lawyers are calling, and it's just a nightmare right now." Audrey rattled off a string of excuses, her panic rising. "And now, Audrey," Eleanor cut her off, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than any shout. "Or I call the real estate agent right now and stop this sale." If you're gripped by Eleanor's story and want to see how this unfolds, make sure to keep watching. Like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss a single twist in this tale of betrayal and unexpected power. Eleanor's quiet ultimatum hung in the air, a silken thread of menace. On the other end of the line, Audrey's frantic apologies and excuses abruptly ceased. When her voice returned, it was no longer panicked, but cold, edged with a steely, calculating resolve that Eleanor recognized from Liam's own professional demeanor. "You can't stop the sale, Mom," Audrey stated, her tone chillingly devoid of emotion. "The contracts are signed. It's too late." Eleanor didn't bother to reply. She simply pressed the end call button, severing the connection. Audrey's misplaced confidence, built on a foundation of deceit and assumption, would crumble soon enough. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a strange calm washing over her. The storm was coming, but she was ready. Exactly 20 minutes later, a furious pounding rattled her apartment door. Eleanor made them wait. She listened to the insistent rapping, letting it build, letting Audrey and Liam feel a fraction of the anxiety she had endured for years. When she finally opened the door, the sight of them, framed against the muted hallway, struck her. Audrey, her daughter whom Eleanor had nurtured and sacrificed for, stood before her a stranger. Her face was contorted with fury, her eyes blazing with an unfamiliar hardness. The expensive, tailored suit she wore seemed to emphasize her transformation from the bright-eyed girl Eleanor remembered to this sharp, formidable woman. Beside her, Liam stood stiffly, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool hallway. He tried to project an air of confidence, but his eyes darted nervously, betraying a deep unease. "What the hell is going on, Mom?" Audrey demanded, her voice an angry rasp. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past Eleanor into the cramped living room, her movements jarringly aggressive. Liam followed, his face a mask of strained politeness. Eleanor merely closed the door softly behind them, then turned to face her uninvited guests. She walked to her small kitchen table, picked up her phone, and turned it to face them. On the screen, the crisp photograph of the deed, clearly showing Eleanor Vance's name as the sole owner, glowed with undeniable truth. Liam's eyes, scanning the document, widened almost imperceptibly. The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen. The legal implications, the gravity of their blunder, clearly registered with him in an instant. He sank heavily into the worn recliner Eleanor had brought from her old house, looking suddenly frail. The air crackled with a tension that was almost suffocating. Audrey, however, remained rooted to the spot, staring at the phone screen as if it were an alien artifact. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You moved out. You gave us permission to sell it." Her certainty, built on a lie, was beginning to fray. "I moved out of my house, yes," Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but firm, each word a stone dropping into a still pond. "Because you told me it was temporary to make it market-ready. But I never transferred ownership, Audrey. Not a single document was signed by me to that effect. The house is still mine, legally and wholly." Liam, ever the lawyer, seemed to regain a sliver of his composure. He cleared his throat. "Now, Eleanor, I think there's simply been a misunderstanding here. A clerical error, perhaps, or a miscommunication about the extent of the arrangement." He was already trying to find a legal loophole, a way to mitigate the disaster. Eleanor fixed him with a cold stare. "A misunderstanding?" she countered, a sharp edge entering her voice for the first time. "Or did you just not bother to check the legal documents, Liam? Because you figured the old lady wouldn't know any better? That she'd just roll over and let you take her home?" The accusation hung heavy in the air, a blunt blow to Liam's carefully constructed professional facade. He winced, averting his gaze. Audrey, however, rallied, her defiance still warring with a dawning terror. "Fine," she snapped, tossing her head. "So it's still in your name. That's easily fixed. We can fix that. You can sign whatever needs to be signed now. Just sign the papers, Mom, and we can move on. We have buyers, the Millers. They're ready." Her voice, despite its urgency, still held a note of command, as if Eleanor was merely a stubborn obstacle to be bypassed. Eleanor looked at her daughter, really looked at her. She noticed the expensive leather handbag slung over Audrey's shoulder, the gleam of the diamond earrings, the subtle tailoring of her suit. All paid for, Eleanor realized, with the money they expected to gain from a house that wasn't theirs, from a house that was hers. The injustice burned anew, stoked by Audrey's continued arrogance. No, Eleanor stated, simply and unequivocally. The single word resonated with a finality that made Audrey flinch. I mean, I'm not signing anything. The house isn't for sale. Audrey's composure, already cracking, shattered completely. Her face, flushed with anger, turned an ugly shade of red. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the small room. We have contracts. We've already spent money on improvements. You promised. Improvements I didn't ask for, Eleanor replied, her voice remaining steady, betraying no emotion. To a house that wasn't yours to improve. Liam, seeing the volatile direction the conversation was headed, stepped forward, attempting to insert a voice of reason into the escalating confrontation. His posture was still rigid, but his tone was calmer, more measured. Eleanor, please, let's not make rash decisions. We can discuss this. This sale, it's beneficial for everyone. It's a significant amount of money for your retirement. A comfortable nest egg, as we discussed. He appealed to rationality, trying to steer the discussion back to the narrative of benevolent generosity they had woven. Eleanor merely arched an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. And what if I don't want to sell? Audrey gasped, her mouth falling open. What? Why not? You have this apartment. It's perfect for you. You said you liked it. You said it was less upkeep. She was incredulous, unable to fathom an alternative to the future she had meticulously planned. Eleanor turned her head, looking out the window at the small, meticulously kept garden of Mrs. Kim, her elderly neighbor across the courtyard. A lone rosebush, heavy with fragrant blooms, was climbing the trellis. Maybe, she said, her voice soft but firm, maybe I want to move back in. Audrey's face contorted with outrage. You are being absolutely unreasonable, Mom. After all the work we've put in, all the money we've invested to get the house ready, to make it valuable for you. Eleanor slowly turned back to her daughter, her eyes hard. The work, Audrey? You mean the work of spending my equity without asking my permission on a house you had no legal right to touch? Those improvements were for your benefit, not mine. They were part of your scheme. Liam cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He was back in full lawyer mode, his voice taking on a grave, warning tone. Eleanor, there are binding contracts with the buyers, the Millers. If you pull out now, there will be significant financial penalties. We could be looking at a very messy lawsuit. They could sue for a breach of contract for damages. It could cost us a fortune. He was trying to intimidate her, to scare her back into compliance. Eleanor walked over to a small, unassuming cabinet in the corner of her living room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a slim, manila folder. She held it up, its contents rustling faintly. Liam, she said, her voice dripping with quiet authority, do you remember all those documents you sent me over the past 2 years? The ones titled Power of Attorney or Renovation Authorization? The ones you kept insisting I sign, telling me they were just formalities? She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Well, I kept them. All of them. Unsigned. She opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents, crisp and untouched. Show me, Liam, Eleanor challenged, her eyes fixed on his now pale face. Show me one piece of paper that gives you the legal right to sell my house. One piece of paper that bears my signature, transferring ownership or giving you power of attorney. Liam stared at the folder, then at Eleanor, then back at the floor. His lawyer's mind, sharp and analytical, was undoubtedly racing, realizing the devastating truth. The contracts they had signed with the Millers were based on a fraudulent premise. They were worthless. He had no answer. He knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he couldn't. In fact, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, the Millers, those poor innocent buyers, they could sue you and Audrey for fraud, embezzlement, misrepresentation. The list is quite long, I imagine, for a lawyer of your caliber. The subtle barb struck its mark. Liam flinched, his jaw tightening. You're insane, Audrey shrieked, her voice cracking with fury and desperation. You are completely irrational. After everything we've done for you, after all we've tried to give you. Eleanor felt a wave of cold, righteous anger surge through her. It had been building for years, buried under layers of polite smiles and hopeful longing, and now it was finally, gloriously breaking free. Irrational, Audrey, she spat, her voice no longer calm, but vibrating with a lifetime of suppressed pain. Let me tell you what's irrational. What's irrational is a mother working herself to death, taking double shifts, eating cereal for dinner every night, wearing thrift store clothes, so her daughter can have a new microscope. What's irrational is a mother refinancing her only asset, her home, to pay for her daughter's expensive college education, and then her elaborate wedding, never asking for a penny back, only for her daughter's happiness. She took a step closer to Audrey, her gaze piercing. What's irrational is sacrificing every single thing for a child, only to be tossed aside like an old broken toy, exiled to a tiny apartment, while that child secretly sells your home out from under you. You call me irrational? I call that betrayal. Audrey recoiled, but her eyes, though wide with shock, still held a stubborn, almost defensive entitlement. Nobody asked you to do those things, Mom, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, almost casual. Those were your choices. The words hit Eleanor with a sickening thud, colder than any insult. Nobody asked you to do those things. It wasn't a denial of her sacrifice, but a complete dismissal of it. A confirmation that Audrey saw her mother's lifelong devotion not as a gift, but as a freely offered, expected service. Gratitude was absent, replaced by a chilling sense of entitlement. Liam, sensing the situation spinning entirely out of control, quickly intervened. Okay, this isn't productive. Everyone needs to cool off. Let's take a break. We can talk about this later, more calmly. Eleanor fixed him with a stare that brooked no argument. I've had plenty of time to cool off, Liam. 24 years, in fact, to think about this. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, allowing its weight to settle. Then she delivered the final blow. 24 years ago, after Robert left, I put the house into a trust. Audrey and Liam exchanged a bewildered glance. The word trust clearly meant nothing to Audrey, but Liam's eyes widened again, a dawning horror spreading across his face. A protective trust, Eleanor explained, her voice now calm once more but imbued with immense power. It states that the house cannot be sold or transferred unless very specific conditions are met. Conditions like maintaining a respectful and loving relationship, treating Eleanor with dignity, and including her in all major property decisions. She looked at Audrey, her gaze unwavering. And you, Audrey, have spectacularly failed on every single count. She picked up the addendum, unfolded it, and began to read aloud, her voice clear and resonant, the precise legal language echoing in the small room. Furthermore, any attempts to sell or transfer ownership without the explicit, documented consent of the grantor, obtained under conditions of mutual respect and full transparency, shall render such attempts null and void. She held up the paper, then lowered it, looking from Audrey's stricken face to Liam's defeated expression. That text message you sent, Audrey, your house is already sold. Bye. That alone violates the mutual respect clause. It's cruel, dismissive, and certainly not transparent. Liam slumped further into the recliner. My firm, we're actually having some financial difficulties right now, he mumbled, his voice barely audible, finally revealing the true desperate motive. This commission, it was crucial. A cold, hard knot tightened in Eleanor's chest, not for Liam's financial woes, but for the chilling clarity of his confession. He hadn't just been Audrey's husband, a supportive son-in-law. He had been their real estate agent. 6% commission, he muttered, almost to himself, his voice laced with defeat. Eleanor did the quick math. 6% of $450,000, $27,000. That was the price of her home, the price of her daughter's love, the price of her own dignity. The knowledge solidified her resolve, crystallizing the bitter truth of their greed. Get out, Eleanor commanded, her voice low and steady, devoid of the earlier anger, replaced now by a quiet, unwavering authority. Audrey, who had been listening to Liam's confession with a horrified, almost childlike expression, suddenly burst into tears. Mom, how could you? We were just trying to help you, to make sure you were comfortable in your old age. Eleanor met her daughter's gaze, her eyes unwavering. By lying to me, by excluding me from my own life, by treating me like I was already dead, a nuisance to be managed and disposed of? Her voice was laced with an icy contempt. No, Audrey, you weren't trying to help me. You were trying to help yourselves. Audrey, her face streaked with tears and fury, let out a frustrated scream. Fine, Fane, fine, keep your precious house. Live there all alone like the bitter old woman you've become. She spun on her heel, slamming the apartment door behind her with a resounding crash that rattled the thin walls. Liam, looking utterly defeated, mumbled a barely audible apology to Eleanor before scurrying out, following his wife's retreating form. The sudden silence in the small apartment was deafening, yet it brought not sadness, but an overwhelming wave of relief. The storm had broken, and Eleanor, against all odds, was still standing. The years of quiet desperation, the slow erosion of her self-worth, had been replaced by a fierce, invigorating sense of control. She took a deep breath, the scent of fresh determination filling her lungs. It was time to make some calls. Her first call was to Mrs. Miller, the real estate agent representing the buyers. Eleanor introduced herself calmly, explaining in precise, measured tones that there had been a serious error in the transaction. The sellers, she explained, do not and have never legally owned the property they were attempting to sell. I am the rightful owner, and the property is not, in fact, for sale. Mrs. Miller's stunned silence on the other end of the line was audible, quickly followed by a flurry of shocked questions. Eleanor answered them patiently, providing just enough detail to convey the gravity of the situation without revealing her daughter's full betrayal. Next, she called her lawyer, Mr. Davison. He listened patiently as Eleanor recounted the entire sordid tale, from the initial help with downsizing to Audrey's final cruel text. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice reassuring, you are entirely within your rights. The trust is ironclad. Any contract they signed without your consent is null and void. We can draft a formal notice to Audrey and Liam immediately, instructing them to cease and desist any further actions regarding your property. Thank you, Mr. Davison, Eleanor replied, feeling a burden lift from her shoulders. And no, I don't wish to press fraud charges. I just want my house back. She wasn't interested in destroying Audrey, not completely. She just wanted justice in her home. Her third call was the hardest. She dialed the number for the Millers directly, the innocent young couple whose dreams had been inadvertently tangled in her family's deception. She explained the situation gently, apologizing profusely for the pain and confusion this would undoubtedly cause them. I wish you both all the best in finding your perfect home, Eleanor concluded, her voice sincere. I truly do. The Millers, though clearly devastated, seemed to understand that Eleanor was not the source of their misfortune, but another victim. With the crucial calls made, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Her mind, no longer clouded by doubt or fear, began to churn with a new purpose. She made a mental list, changed the locks, notified the utility companies, arranged for the mail to be forwarded. Each item was a step back, a reclamation of her life. 3 days later, Eleanor stood in front of her house, the familiar colonial, now legally hers again. Mr. Davison had arranged for a locksmith, and with a satisfying click, the heavy front door swung open. The scent of fresh paint and new wood hit her, cold and sterile, stripping away the familiar comfort she expected. Inside, her beloved home was unrecognizable. The warm, inviting atmosphere she remembered had been replaced by a stark, impersonal showroom. The walls, once a comforting cream, were now a harsh, unforgiving white. The avocado green kitchen, while certainly dated, had held the memories of countless family meals. Now, sleek, cold granite counters and minimalist gray cabinets stared back at her. The cozy, lived-in feel was gone, replaced by a soulless efficiency. She walked through the rooms, a strange mixture of recognition and alienation washing over her. The built-in bookshelves in the living room, where she had kept her treasured collection of first editions, were torn out, leaving an empty, featureless wall. In the master bedroom, the comforting blue she had chosen decades ago was replaced by a trendy, charcoal gray, making the room feel smaller, colder. Each change was a fresh wound, a tangible reminder of Audrey's brutal disregard. Then she found it. In Audrey's old bedroom, now stripped bare of its former personality, sat a stack of moving boxes carelessly labeled. Audrey's stuff, one read in Liam's scrawl, Eleanor opened it. Inside, piled haphazardly, were mementos of Audrey's childhood. Old school projects, faded drawings, a collection of horse figurines. They were packed away, Eleanor realized, like garbage. Relics of a past that Audrey had clearly wanted to discard. A wave of raw emotion, a mixture of anger and profound sadness, washed over her. She reached into another box, pulling out a small, misshapen ceramic handprint, painted a vibrant blue. Mom, it read, etched in a child's uncertain hand. Happy Mother's Day. It was from Audrey when she was 5. Beneath it, nestled amongst loose papers, were several photo albums. Eleanor's fingers traced the image of a smiling Audrey, missing 2 front teeth, holding up the very same handprint. Had Audrey really forgotten all these memories, all these years of shared love and joy? Had they meant so little to her? In the days that followed Eleanor's return to her house, the calls from Audrey and Liam were relentless. Audrey's calls alternated between tearful pleas and furious accusations, her voice cracking with desperation. Liam's calls were more controlled, attempts at intimidation wrapped in legal jargon, threatening breach of contract lawsuits and hinting at their financial ruin. Eleanor ignored them all. She changed her phone number, a small but significant act of severing the connection. She spent her days walking through her house, not yet feeling like home, but slowly, painstakingly, cataloging the changes, mapping out her future. On the 4th day, the quiet solitude was shattered by the unmistakable sound of a key turning in her front door. A moment of chilling fear, primitive and sharp, pierced Eleanor. Then it quickly subsided, replaced by a surge of defiant clarity. This is my house. She remembered the keys she had given Audrey years ago, a symbol of trust now thoroughly shattered. She heard their voices from the foyer, low and conspiratorial at first. Liam's voice, rough with frustration, complained about this whole mess. Then Audrey's, chillingly calm, suggested, maybe we need to have Mom evaluated. Dr. Martinez, she handled Grandma's case. We could argue mental incompetence. The casual cruelty of the suggestion, her own daughter plotting to have her declared insane, solidified Eleanor's resolve. There was no turning back. Audrey entered the living room first, holding a branded bag from a local coffee shop. Her face was carefully composed, a fake sweet smile plastered on her lips. Mom, good morning. I brought coffee and pastries. Liam and I thought we could finally have a civilized conversation. Just the 3 of us. In my living room, Eleanor clarified, her voice flat, her gaze unwavering. In my house. She stood in the center of the room, a silent sentinel. And there will be no civilized conversation until you acknowledge the truth. Audrey's smile faltered, but she pressed on. Mom, we just want to find a way to move forward. This has been so stressful for everyone. Eleanor didn't respond directly. Instead, she took out her phone. Mr. Davison, she said into the receiver, her voice clear and strong. They're here, in my house. Would you mind explaining to them what trespassing means? She then put the phone on speaker, placing it on the coffee table between them. Mr. Davison's calm, professional voice filled the room, cutting through the tense silence. Audrey, Liam, this is Mr. Davison. I am Eleanor Vance's legal counsel. I've advised her to formally notify you that any future entry into this property, without her explicit written consent, will be considered criminal trespass. Furthermore, given the unauthorized modifications and alterations made to Mrs. Vance's property, she has a clear legal basis to sue you both for vandalism and damages, should she choose to pursue it. Audrey sputtered, But we were trying to help her. This is our family home. We were making improvements for her future. Your intentions, Ms. Vance, Mr. Davison's voice remained even, do not override the legal fact of ownership. You had no legal claim to this property, and therefore no right to sell it, nor to make any alterations. Your actions constitute a serious breach of contract with the buyers, and a significant legal liability for yourselves. Audrey's face crumpled. Mom, please, she pleaded, dropping the pretense, her voice raw. Don't do this. We can still make this work. We can get you a beautiful condo, exactly what you wanted. We can set up a travel fund for you so you can see the world. With what money, Audrey? Eleanor asked, her voice quiet but piercing. The money you were planning to steal from the sale of my house? The $27,000 commission Liam was going to pocket? The $23,000 you spent on improvements that I never asked for, that were purely for your own benefit? Liam, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. We were going to set up an annuity for you, Eleanor. A substantial one. We weren't going to just take everything. He avoided giving a specific amount, his gaze fixed on the floor. An annuity? Eleanor scoffed. And how much would that substantial annuity have been, Liam? Would it have been enough to cover the $250,000 in equity you were hoping to walk away with? Or was it just enough to keep me quiet, comfortable, and out of your way? She paused, letting her words sink in. You both planned this. You conspired to sell my home, my legacy, without my knowledge or consent, for your own financial gain. Audrey burst into fresh tears. We needed that money, Mom. Liam's firm. It's in trouble. We needed that commission. We were just trying to survive. The kids need parents who don't commit fraud, Eleanor interrupted, her voice gaining strength. Who don't lie and steal from their own family. Who don't try to have their own mother declared mentally incompetent just to get their greedy hands on her assets. Audrey's head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. Mom, we are still your family. How can you say that? Eleanor looked at her daughter, truly looked into her eyes, seeing not the little girl she had raised, but a stranger. The entitlement was still there, lurking beneath the tears, the self-pity. No, Eleanor calmly declared, the word a final, definitive severing. You're not. She walked to the front door, pulling it open. Get out, she commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Now! Audrey and Liam stood frozen for a moment. Then, defeated, they walked past her, out into the sunshine. Eleanor watched them go, not with triumph, but with a profound sadness. She closed the door firmly, decisively, on her daughter. The woman walking across her lawn was not Audrey. Not anymore. She was a stranger, plotting her next move. And Eleanor knew exactly what her next move would be. She remembered with a chilling clarity a specific clause in the trust agreement. A clause she had added years ago. A what-if scenario she had never truly believed she would need. Audrey had just forfeited her inheritance. Upon Eleanor's death, the house would not go to her. It would go to charity. 6 months had passed since Eleanor had closed the door on Audrey and Liam, a decisive click that severed not just a physical connection, but an emotional tether. Now she sat in her garden, restored to its former glory. Audrey and Liam's expensive, impersonal landscaping, the angular concrete pavers, the harsh, spiky desert plants, had been systematically ripped out. In their place, Eleanor had planted roses, hydrangeas, and sweet-smelling lavender, creating a vibrant English cottage chaos that spoke of warmth and life. Her hands, calloused from digging in the soil, felt more alive than they had in years. She savored the moment, a book resting unread in her lap, the gentle hum of bees a comforting soundtrack. The house, too, was slowly but surely becoming hers again. The sterile white walls were gone, replaced by soft greens, warm yellows, and calming blues. The cold granite countertops in the kitchen had been swapped for a rich, inviting butcher block, scarred with the history of countless family meals. Her old, comfortable furniture, rescued from storage, found its rightful place, each piece breathing familiarity back into the rooms. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary, a canvas for her renewed spirit. Eleanor was not alone in her peaceful reclaiming. New friendships had bloomed in the wake of the storm. Her neighbor, Brenda Davies, a spry woman with an infectious laugh, often joined her for tea on the porch. And Arthur, a quiet, kind widower from down the street, would sometimes stop by to offer a hand with the heavier garden work, his presence a steady, comforting anchor. They were both quietly supportive, offering companionship without judgment, understanding without words. One crisp autumn morning, an email from Mr. Davison arrived. The subject line read, "Trust modification confirmed." Eleanor clicked it open, her heart a mix of sorrow and profound relief. The legal paperwork was complete. The trust had been officially modified, irrevocably removing Audrey as a beneficiary. Upon Eleanor's death, the house would now pass to the Children's Hospital Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping children in crisis. Eleanor envisioned the laughter of children, the healing of families, echoing through the halls of her home long after she was gone. The house, once a source of bitter conflict, would now serve a meaningful, selfless purpose. She hadn't heard from Audrey in 2 months. The last desperate texts, a flurry of accusations and pleas, had been about Liam's firm. "They're bankrupt, Mom. We lost everything. You have to reconsider the sale, please." Eleanor had deleted them without a second thought. She had heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Audrey and Liam had indeed lost their condo, taken significant pay cuts, and were struggling with childcare. For Liam, Eleanor felt a detached sense of justice. For Audrey, there was no pity, only a deep, aching sorrow for the daughter she had lost long before the legal battle. But for her grandchildren, Emily and Noah, Eleanor felt a pang of genuine regret. They were innocent casualties in their parents' greed. One afternoon, a car pulled up to her curb. A young woman stepped out, her face vaguely familiar. She looked around, her eyes wide with recognition, then walked towards Eleanor, a shy smile on her face. "Mrs. Vance?" she asked. It's Natalie. Natalie Campbell. I used to live next door. Jenny's older sister?" Eleanor's face lit up. "Natalie, my goodness, look at you. You were just a little girl last time I saw you." Natalie, now Natalie Walker, a poised and warm pediatric nurse, was back in the neighborhood. Her husband, David, a professor at the local university, and their twin boys, Ethan and Leo, were looking for a house. "We want our boys to grow up here," Natalie explained, her eyes sweeping over the familiar street, "the way we did. This neighborhood, this community, it's special." As Natalie spoke, Eleanor felt an unexpected warmth spread through her, a flicker of hope. She looked at Natalie's genuine smile, her kind eyes, her earnest desire for her children to have the same idyllic childhood that Natalie and Audrey once shared on this very street. That evening, Eleanor discussed it with Brenda and Arthur, who listened intently, offering quiet encouragement. "It would be a good thing, Eleanor," Brenda said gently, "a good thing for that house." The next day, Eleanor called Natalie. "I've been thinking about what you said," Eleanor began, "about finding a home for your boys." She then laid out her conditions. She wanted to stay in the house until spring, giving her time to find a new condo and ease into the transition. She wanted input on any future sales of the house to ensure it remained a family home. And most importantly, she wanted to meet the boys. Natalie readily agreed, her voice brimming with excitement. A few days later, Eleanor met David, Natalie's kind and thoughtful husband, and then the twins, Ethan and Leo. They were boisterous, curious, and full of life. Watching them explore her backyard, pointing at the old oak tree, their faces alight with wonder, Eleanor knew, deep in her soul, that this was the right decision. They agreed on a fair price, a little less than the Millers had offered, but Eleanor didn't care. She wasn't seeking maximum profit. She was seeking peace, legacy, and a return of warmth to her beloved home. She knew Natalie and David would love it, cherish it, and fill it with the kind of joy and stability she had always wished for. Months later, settled into her bright, cheerful new condo, a place that felt truly her own, Eleanor received an unexpected call. It was Michael Miller, one of the original buyers. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice hesitant, "I just wanted to call and clarify something. We ran into Audrey and Liam, and Audrey, she told us a rather elaborate story about you being in assisted living and having mental difficulties, and that's why the sale fell through." Eleanor listened patiently, a faint smile on her lips. "Mr. Miller," she calmly interrupted, "I'm perfectly well, living happily in my new condo. The sale fell through because they were attempting to sell a property they did not own. That's the truth of it." He apologized profusely, realizing he had been fed another of Audrey's fabrications. A few days later, her phone rang again. It was Natalie. "Mrs. Vance." Natalie's voice was warm, filled with gratitude. "This house, it has brought our family such joy. Ethan and Leo absolutely adore the oak tree. We think about you every day and hope you know what a gift you gave us." Eleanor hung up the phone, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She had not found a mere transaction. She had found a gift, not just for Natalie and her family, but for herself. In giving her home, she had received something far more valuable: the freedom to write her own ending, on her own terms, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was, not for what she possessed. She was finally truly at peace.